Everything you have been told about how long ancient humans lived is wrong. And the real story is darker, stranger, and far more beautiful than the little fact most people carry around in their heads. This is a story about a stick figure named Pip. Pip looks simple: a round head, a single line for a body, four thin lines for arms and legs, and two dots for eyes that somehow manage to look very pleased with themselves. And on the night this story begins, Pip was sitting at a dinner table, feeling extremely smart. Someone at the table asked a question: how long did people live back in the Stone Age? And Pip, who loved being the one who knew things, leaned back, folded his stick arms, and said the line he had heard 100 times. Oh, that is easy. Back then, people only lived to about 30. By 30, you were basically an old man. Gray hair, aching bones, ready for the grave. And everyone nodded, because everyone has heard that number, 30. It feels true, does it not? But across the table sat an old stick figure, white hair drawn in little curls, a face full of soft wrinkles, and she just smiled and said one quiet thing: if people died at 30, then how am I drawn here at 76? Pip opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Nothing came out. And that, my friend, is where Pip's real story begins. Because that one little question cracked something open in him, a door he could not close again. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand a truth about your own life that almost nobody around you understands, and it changes everything. That night, Pip could not sleep. He lay flat on his bed, a single line on a rectangle, staring at the ceiling. 30. The number kept circling in his head like a fly he could not swat. Where did that number even come from? Was it real? Was it a lie? And if it was real, how could that old woman exist at all? So Pip did what any curious little stick figure would do. He decided to go and find out. He grabbed a lantern, a notebook, and far too much confidence, and he stepped out his front door. And the moment he did, the world around him melted away. The houses, the streetlights, the modern roads, gone. And Pip found himself standing in the middle of a green and ancient land, tens of thousands of years in the past. In front of him was a small group of stick figures, a hunter-gatherer band, maybe 40 of them, no more. They moved across the landscape, light and quick, carrying everything they owned. And Pip thought, aha, so here they are, the people who all die at 30. Let me go count the old men. But here is the thing he was about to learn. And it is the single most important idea in this entire story, so lean in. The number 30 is technically true, and it is almost completely misleading, both at the same time. How can that be? Let me show you with something simple. A thought experiment that Pip scratched into his notebook by the firelight that night. Imagine a village of just 10 stick figures. 10 little lives. Now, in this ancient world, 5 of those 10 die before they reach their 5th birthday. 5 tiny stick figures, gone before they ever grow up. It is grim, but it was real, and it was common. The other 5 survive childhood, and those 5 go on to live long, full lives. They live all the way to 70. Now, let me ask you, what is the average lifespan in this village? You add it up. 5 little ones who died at around age 2. 5 elders who died at 70. You add all 10 ages together, and you divide by 10. And the number you get? Roughly 36. Look at that number, 36. It sounds like everyone in the village dropped dead in their 30s. But look closer. Did a single person actually die at 36? No, not one. Half the village lived to 70. The other half never made it to kindergarten. That number, 36, describes the life of nobody. Nobody in that whole village lived a life that looked like 36 years. Pip stared at his own notebook. His little dot eyes went wide. Wait, he whispered. The number is an average, and the average is being dragged down. Not by old people dying young, but by children, by babies. And he was exactly right. This is the difference between two things that sound the same, but are not. There is life expectancy at birth, which counts every single baby, including the ones who die in their first hour. And there is life expectancy later in life, which asks a completely different question. If you survived childhood, how long could you then expect to live? When you ask that second question, the whole world flips upside down. Because the studies are clear, and they are consistent. A person in these ancient bands who survived to age 15 had a very reasonable chance of living into their 60s or even their 70s. That is not a small adjustment. That is the difference between a world where everyone dies young and a world where most grown-ups actually grow old. So, Pip's first big lesson, scratched into his notebook in shaky stick-figure handwriting, was this. Ancient people did not all die at 30. The children died in terrible numbers, but the adults who made it through often lived long, full lives. The 30 was hiding the children inside it. And then Pip looked up from his notebook, and his little face went pale. Because if half of these children were going to die, he suddenly needed to know one thing. Why? What was killing them? And could he bear to watch it happen? He could not yet imagine how heavy the answer would be. Pip walked deeper into the ancient camp, and he began to see things he wished he had not. He saw a tiny stick figure, small and curled, lying still beside a fire while the others wept. He saw a young mother holding a bundle that did not move. He saw the grief etched into faces drawn in simple lines, and somehow the simplicity made it hit harder. Pip sat down quietly and opened his notebook with a shaking hand. He needed to understand the enemy. So, what was it? What took so many of the little ones? The first and biggest answer was infection, disease. And here is where Pip learned something that turned his whole story sideways. He had always assumed that the further back in time you went, the more disease there was. Cavemen, filth, plague, right? But that is not quite how it worked. These hunter-gatherer bands were small, 40 people, maybe 100, and they were always moving. And it turns out that many of the great killer diseases of history, the ones we fear most, smallpox, measles, the plague, simply cannot survive in a group that small and that scattered. Think of a disease like a fire. To keep burning, it needs fuel. It needs new bodies to jump to. In a tiny wandering band, the fire burns through everyone fast, and then it runs out of people and it dies. The chain snaps. So, Pip wrote down a sentence that genuinely shocked him. The crowd diseases needed crowds. And these people had no crowds. But then Pip's lantern flickered, and the scene shifted forward in time. The wandering band was gone. In its place stood a village, then a town, fields of grain, animals in pens. People packed close together, hundreds of them, living in one place, year after year. The great agricultural revolution, the birth of settled life. And Pip thought, surely now things got better. They had food, they had shelter. They stayed in one place. But here came one of the darkest twists in the whole story. Because all those people, crowded together, living beside their animals, drinking from water fouled by waste, had just built the perfect home for disease. The fire finally had its fuel. Now the great epidemics could roar and never run out of bodies. Pip sat back, stunned. So settling down, growing food, building towns, the thing we call progress, actually made infectious disease worse, not better. At least for a very long time. He underlined that twice. Then he turned to the second great killer. And this one made his little stick hand tremble as he wrote. Childbirth. In these ancient worlds, bringing a new life into being was one of the most dangerous things a person could do. The risk of a mother dying from a single birth might be around 1 or 2%. And 1% sounds small. Until you remember that a woman in these times might give birth not once, but 8 times across her life. Stack that risk, birth after birth, and the lifetime danger could climb past 5, even 8%, which means in some ancient communities, something like 1 in every 12 or 15 mothers would eventually die, bringing life into the world. Pip watched a scene unfold that he would never forget. A mother, a long, hard labor. The other women gathered close, doing everything they knew. And there was nothing more they could do. No surgeon, no medicine. Only their hands and their hope. And sometimes hope was not enough. Pip closed his notebook for a moment. He just sat there in the dark. Because some numbers are not just numbers. They have faces. When he opened the book again, he forced himself to write the full scale of it. Across these ancient and old world populations, somewhere between 30 and 50% of children did not live to grow up. 30 to 50%. Picture a row of 10 children playing. And then picture 3, 4, sometimes 5 of them, simply gone. The most dangerous time of all was the very beginning, the first year or two of life, birth troubles, infection in a tiny body with no defenses and no medicine, hunger when food ran short, the simple fragility of being very, very small in a world with no help. And this, Pip finally understood, was the whole secret behind the number 30. The children dying in such terrible numbers were not living short adult lives. They were not aging quickly. They were not getting old at 30. They were not getting to be adults at all. Their tiny ages, averaged in with everyone else, dragged the whole number down into the dirt. But the children were not the only ones at risk. Pip saw a hunter limp into camp, his leg broken from a fall. In Pip's modern world, that meant a cast and a few weeks of complaining. Here, it could mean infection, fever, and death. A scrape that turned bad. A cut that would not heal. He saw how a small wound, a thing we would barely notice today, could quietly turn into the end. And there was another shadow over the grown-ups, too. Pip saw signs of it in old healed wounds, in scars drawn into ancient bones. Violence. Fights between people, and sometimes between whole groups. Some scientists have argued that a surprising share of adult men in these ancient worlds died not from sickness, but from conflict. Other scientists push back, saying, the few sites we have found may not speak for everyone. Pip wrote both sides down carefully, because honest stories admit what we are still arguing about. But either way, it was one more danger stacked on top of all the others. And that led Pip to the single biggest reason ancient life was so deadly. Not weaker bodies, not faster aging, something much more specific. There were no antibiotics. None. Pip wrote that word and stared at it. Think about it, he murmured. A cut gets infected. Today, you take a cheap little pill and you are fine. Back here, that same infection could spread and turn to fever and end a life in days. Childbirth infections. Wound infections. A bad chest cold that became pneumonia. For almost the entire history of our kind, every one of these was a possible death sentence. Right up until almost yesterday, in the grand scheme of things, we finally invented the medicines that stop them. So here was the truth, settling over Pip like a heavy blanket. The gap between ancient lives and modern lives was never really about ancient bodies being broken or feeble. The danger was always out there. It always existed. The real difference was the tools, the medicines, the simple, cheap miracles that we now barely think about. Pip stood up slowly in the ancient dark. He had come looking for a number. And instead he had found a graveyard of children and mothers, and a world fighting threats with nothing but bare hands. He felt smaller than ever, but he was not finished, because one enormous question was still glowing in his mind. He had seen who died. Now he had to find the ones who lived. Where were the old people? Did they even exist? He lifted his lantern, took a breath, and went looking for the elders. Pip searched the camp, and then he found them, the elders. There, by the warmest part of the fire, sat the old stick figures. White hair drawn in soft curls, faces lined with years, hands slow but steady. And Pip counted them, amazed. They were not rare. They were not curiosities. They were here, woven right into the heart of the group. Some looked well into their 70s. One ancient figure, drawn with the deepest wrinkles of all, might have been 80. Pip rubbed his dot eyes. Wait, he said. There are old people everywhere. In the world where everyone supposedly dies at 30. And then he watched what these elders actually did, and it moved him. One old grandmother sat surrounded by little ones, telling a story with sweeping arm gestures, teaching them which plants to eat and which to fear. Another cradled a grandchild, so the tired young mother could rest. The elders were the memory of the whole band. They remembered the drought from 40 years ago. They knew where the water hid in the dry season. They settled arguments. They held the wisdom that kept everyone alive. Pip wrote down something that scientists call the grandmother hypothesis. And it is one of the most beautiful ideas in this whole story. Here it is. Humans are strange among animals because we keep living long after we stop having children. Why would nature design that? Why keep an animal alive past the point of making babies? The answer, the hypothesis says, is the grandmother's. An old woman who survives helps her grandchildren survive. She feeds them, she watches them, she passes down everything she knows, and that help is so powerful that it shaped our very species. Over countless generations, the grandmothers who lived long gave their families an edge. And so, we became a creature built to grow old. Pip nearly dropped his lantern. "Do you see what this means?" he gasped to no one. If ancient humans really all died at 30, then nature would never have bothered making grandmothers at all. Evolution does not build something it never gets to use. The fact that we have grandmothers, the fact that we are built to age, is itself proof. Proof that long lives were always part of the human story. They were not the exception, they were always there. Then Pip's lantern flickered again, and the scene changed. He was now standing in a bright, quiet room far in the future, surrounded by scientists studying old bones, and he learned how we actually know all this. The scientists who study ancient lives are called paleodemographers, and they read age the way you might read the rings in a tree. They look at how bones have fused. They study the pelvis. They examine the wear on old teeth. From these clues, they guess how old a person was when they died. But Pip noticed the scientists frowning at a problem, and it is a sneaky one. It is fairly easy to tell a child's bones from an adult's, but telling a 45-year-old from a 65-year-old? Much, much harder. The clues fade as we age. So, for many years, scientists simply lumped every older skeleton into one big pile, labeled more or less just old. And do you see the trap in that? If you cannot tell a 60-year-old from an 80-year-old, and you just file them all under old, then your final numbers quietly erase the very oldest people. The long lives vanish into a vague label. The whole picture gets squashed shorter than it really was. Pip leaned over the scientist's shoulders and watched a perfect example unfold. He saw a famous collection of skeletons from a place called Libin, an ancient Native American community in Ohio from over 1,000 years ago. It has been studied for decades. And when scientists first measured it, the numbers told the same old, sad story. Short lives, few people surviving far past their 40s or 50s. The myth confirmed. But then, Pip watched as later scientists came back to those very same bones with better methods, with sharper eyes. And they found something the first study had missed. Many of the skeletons filed away under that vague old label were not just old, they were genuinely elderly. People who had lived much, much longer than the first count had ever allowed. The community had been older and longer lived than anyone first believed. Pip whistled softly. So the bones were the same. The people were the same. Only the tools changed, and suddenly the truth that had been hiding in plain sight finally came out. And this was not a one-time mistake. Pip saw it happen again and again, across collection after collection. The first count said people died young. The later counts kept finding more elders, longer lives, older bones than expected. A pattern. Every time we looked closer and more carefully, the ancient world turned out to be older than we thought. Pip sat down among the bones, his lantern glowing, and felt something shift inside him. He had walked into this story so sure of himself, so smug at that dinner table. And, one by one, every easy assumption had crumbled. The children, the mothers, the missing medicines, the crowded towns that made things worse, the grandmothers built into our very design, the bones that had been quietly misread for years. He thought of the old woman at the dinner table, 76 years old, smiling, asking him how she could possibly exist. And now, finally, Pip understood. She could exist because she had always been able to exist. Old age was never the strange part. Surviving childhood was the hard part. And once you did, a long life was waiting on the other side. But Pip was not done yet. There was one final number out there. One last piece that would tie the whole story together and tell him not just how long the oldest could live, but what the most common ending really was for an ancient adult. And what he found would surprise even him. He picked up his lantern one more time and stepped toward the answer. Pip's last journey took him to a gathering of modern researchers who had done something clever. They had studied hunter-gatherer communities that still live close to the old ways today. Groups like the Hadza of Tanzania and the Aceh of Paraguay, and others, watched and recorded by patient scientists for years. And those scientists, among them researchers named Gervin and Kaplan, found a pattern so steady it almost glowed. The danger was highest in the very first years of life. Then, it dropped low through youth and the prime adult years. Then, around 40 or 50, it began slowly rising again. And Pip realized, with a jolt, that this was the very same shape as the curve in his own modern world. The same human pattern, just shifted, with more danger at every step, because the medicines had not been invented yet. But then the researchers showed Pip one final number. And it is the number I most want you to remember. They asked a simple question. For an adult who survived childhood, what was the single most common age to die? Not the average dragged down by babies. The most common ending, the most likely final chapter. And the answer clustered right around 70 to 72 years old. Pip just stood there. 70 to 72. He said it out loud, slowly, letting it sink in. The most common ending for an ancient adult who made it through childhood was not 30. It was not 40. It was their 70s. A long life. A full life. The number everyone repeats at dinner tables was not just a little off. It was hiding a person who lived to 70. And not by some rare miracle. As the everyday, ordinary, most likely path, once the dangerous years of childhood were behind them, and the scientists showed Pip one more thing. When they looked at the bones of those who reached old age long ago, they found the very same marks of aging that we know today. Worn joints, worn teeth, old healed breaks, bones thinned by the years. The ancient elders aged the way we age. They were not a different kind of human. They were us, just walking the same road, with far fewer of them lucky enough to reach the end of it. But the researchers had one more lesson, and it complicated the happy ending in an honest way. Pip looked back at that great shift from wandering to farming. And he learned that when humans first settled down to farm, their health often got worse, not better. The early farmers were frequently shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their bones showed more stress. Their teeth showed more decay. In some places, even more children died. Scientists sometimes call this the hard price of the first farms. So, the story of human health was never a straight line climbing upward. It zigged. It zagged. Wandering bands were safe from crowd diseases but faced the wild. Farmers had steady food but crowded sickness. Later came great cities, and with them came the terrible waves, the plagues of medieval times, the diseases that swept through the Americas, the outbreaks that tore through crowded streets. To lump all of this together and call it simply ancient people is to miss almost everything that matters. Pip closed his notebook for the last time, and he finally understood the whole shape of the truth. So he sat down by the fire to put it all together, the way he wished he had at that dinner table. We tell ourselves a flattering story, he thought. We say the ancient past was short and brutal, and that we modern people are special because we live so much longer. And that story makes us feel proud. But it is mostly wrong. Because here is the real achievement, and it is more wonderful than the myth. We did not raise the ceiling of human life. People could always live into their 70s and beyond. That was always possible. That was always within us. What we actually did was raise the floor. We learned slowly, painfully, across thousands of years and countless griefs, how to stop so many of our people from dying before they ever got their chance. We pulled the babies back from the edge. We saved the mothers. We beat back the infections with cheap, simple medicine. We stopped a broken leg from becoming a funeral. That, Pip realized, is the true gift of the modern world. Not that we made old age possible. Old age was always there, waiting on the far side of childhood. The gift is that so many more of us now get to walk all the way to it. The children who once would have been lost now grow up. They get to find out, at last, just how long a human life was always meant to be. And as that thought settled, the ancient world melted away once more. The fire, the elders, the green and dangerous land, all of it faded. And Pip found himself back at the dinner table, in his own time, his lantern gone, his notebook full. The old woman with the white curls was still sitting across from him, still smiling, still 76 years old. And she asked him again, gently, "So, how long did people live back in the Stone Age?" And this time, Pip did not lean back and fold his arms. He looked at her for a long moment, at her wrinkles, at her years, at the simple, ordinary miracle of her sitting there, and his little dot eyes filled with something soft. The children, he said quietly. So many of the children did not make it, and that broke the number and made it look like everyone died young. But the ones who grew up, they could live just as long as you. People like you were always here. We just learned how to let more of you arrive. The old woman reached across the table and patted his thin stick hand. And Pip understood that the number 30 was real. It just never meant what he thought it meant. It was darker than he imagined, in its story of lost children and mothers. And it was brighter than he imagined, in its quiet promise that a long life was always part of being human. So the next time you hear someone say it, that people back then only lived to 30, you will know the truth hiding inside that little fact. You will know about the children. You will know about the elders by the fire. You will know that we did not stretch the limits of life. We simply learned to stop losing each other so soon. And that, my friend, is a story worth carrying with you. Not a story of how short life used to be. A story of how many more of us now get to find out how long it can be. Keep wondering. Keep digging beneath the easy answers. And remember that behind every simple number, there are real faces, real lives, and a truth far richer than the myth. Together, we are building a community that heals, one true story at a time.